listen. The world is talking. World Talk Radio, Studio A.
Our guest today is with the Civil War Preservation Trust. We'll find out what's the single most threatened Civil War site in America when we return on Civil War Talk Radio.
Hey y'all, this is Stephen Cochran. As a country artist, I have traveled around this great country of ours, often meeting our brave men and women in uniform. And as a Marine and veteran of both the Iraq and Afghan conflict, I know how important it is to thank our troops who defend our freedom each and every day. One of the best ways to thank them is to give their children and spouses the gift of education. Scholarships for 2 years, 4 years, and vocational school. This is exactly what a national charity, Thanks USA, does. Please go to their website, www.thanksusa.org, to make a generous donation to the Thanks USA Scholarship Fund for the families of the troops, and I thank you.
You're listening to World Talk Radio, Studio A.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, talking today with the Communications and Policy Director from the Civil War Preservation Trust. His name is Jim Campy, and we've been discussing the preservation movement, the wonderful efforts of the Civil War Preservation Trust to preserve Civil War battlefields, some of the victories, some of the defeats in preservation over the years. If you want to support or just learn more about this organization, please go to www.civilwar.org, O-R-G, and find out more about what's going on with the Civil War preservation movement. In our last segment, we talked about some of the places that are where successful preservation is taking place, like Bentonville, North Carolina. Jim, what is the number one place on your list today that is most under threat of being developed or lost to history?
Well, I think it'd be tough to come up with just one at this point, but I would say certainly one of the biggest battlefield preservation defeats that we have suffered in the past 10 years just occurred last month when the Frederick County, Virginia Board of Supervisors voted, I believe the vote was 4-3, to allow expansion of a mining operation onto additional battlefield land. In fact, some of the mining is going into the area where the famous Union counterattack occurred that decided the battle. So it really was just a mind-boggling vote. I mean, here's a situation where you've got one of the most important battlefields of the Civil War. So from a tourism perspective, this is what you want. You've got some of the most famous names of the Civil War fought there, and a considerable amount of public opposition to the mining operation. But unfortunately, that was approved at the end of May. And we continue to work with local and national groups to try to mitigate the damage, but a really, really unfortunate situation.
This is the Cedar Creek battlefield?
Yes, that's correct.
And I saw in one of your news releases that there's a local Civil War interest group that apparently, from the looks of things, seems to have been bought off by the mining interests.
Well, I like to paraphrase a former president about what we call the 13th commandment, which is "Thou shall not disparage another preservation group." I won't put you on fire at this point, but we certainly are disappointed.
Well, if from what my reading online indicates, a group has received gifts of land from a mining company and at the same time has stopped opposing the mining company's operations on or near the battlefield, so listeners can draw their own conclusions from that. But that is certainly an unfortunate turn of events, and we hope there aren't many more of those like that people will recognize the importance of preserving these places. What?
One thing I would mention too, Jerry, is that's so important in these preservation fights is that the preservation groups have to work together. The truth, in most of these preservation fights, it's the 8th or 9th inning. We're behind by a few runs. If we don't work together for like a team, then we're going to lose. And, here's a situation where not everybody was working together as a team.
That is unfortunate. I hope people will try to see the big picture. It's also something we're thinking about, that, as you say, the decision was made by local county supervisors, and this is how most of these decisions get made, at the very low level, and it's really local involvement more than anything else that can sway these decisions. If the friends and neighbors speak up, the people who will vote for the constituents of these local supervisors, that's what will really get their ear. But it is unfortunate when these things happen. What about, obviously preservation has also had some great successes. When you mentioned at the beginning of the show the battles of the 90s, the famous battle at Manassas, the Third Battle of Manassas, not 1861 or 62, but I think 1995, when the Disney company planned to put up a park near the battlefield that would simulate the Civil War within spitting distance of the actual battleground and bring all the attendant traffic and general trauma to the area. That proposal was defeated by a national outcry. The whole nation really spoke up, and Disney is not easily defeated, but they chose not to go ahead with that. So there are some major victories in the preservation story, are there not? Absolutely, and the fight against Disney at Manassas is certainly one of them. Although ironically, much of that land later was developed where Disney wanted to put their theme park. It was just done in less profile developments, smaller chunks, but much of that is gone today. But obviously, even combined, it wouldn't have had the impact of a Disney America that it was proposed back then. But there have been other big victories, too. We had a big victory against the development of Chancellorsville back in 2003, and there we were actually able to save the land. We didn't just defeat the mini metropolis proposal, as we called it, that was planned for part of the battlefield. We actually got in there and were able to protect some of the land. And a couple of years ago, the famous Slaughter Pen Farm on the Fredericksburg battlefield was put up for sale. In fact, it was being called one of the best commercial properties in Virginia. It had an airport next to it, a railroad, a river nearby. The only thing you couldn't do there was launch a satellite. But we were able to get in there, work out a deal, and for $12 million, we were able to save this battlefield where 5,000 men became casualties. Well, it's good to know those things. I remember in my former career as a museum historian, I remember the fundraiser, the development director there telling me one day, Jerry, people don't give to needy causes, they give to successful causes. And we portrayed ourselves as a successful museum, which we were in those days, and it worked. And people, I know, will be cheered to hear of the many successes of the preservation movement as well. Is there a possibility of too much success in the sense that a battlefield, an unknown battlefield, was identified, preserved from having a 7-Eleven built on it, and then so many people come and show up that it becomes overrun? Can anything like that ever happen? I think that there's a small risk of that, but there's so much out there that needs to be protected. The job of preserving all these battlefields is so enormous. We're never going to be able to protect all of them or come even close. So, I don't think, ultimately we're going to have to worry about that situation. Well, I guess I think of it in the sense of one of my favorite battlefields to visit for many years has been Perryville in Kentucky, which, when I first saw it, was just completely undeveloped, unprotected, but undeveloped. It's in the middle of nowhere, and the battlefield looked very much as it did in October 1862. You couldn't walk on it because it was all still being farmed. It was in private hands. And there was a small state parcel that was owned. I think there was no national participation there at all at the time. As the Civil War boom went on through the 80s and 90s, more people visited the place, and as more people visit, suddenly it becomes less the middle of nowhere. And my understanding now is there has been some state action to protect more of the land there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if your organization have you been involved with Perryville?
Yes, we have. I believe, I don't know the exact number, but I think about half of the land there protected has been protected in part by CWPT. And
that's very good news. I guess it struck me as a place that was hiding in plain sight. It was because it was so unprotected, unmonumented, unmarked. It was just sitting there as it had for all these years. There are places like that in rural North Carolina, here in the eastern part of the state, where you can be driving along and suddenly realize, hey, they fought here in '65, and it's just still the same plantation look. But eventually, things. You can't count on that staying that way forever. If we don't act and protect those places, they will be developed and disappear. What is your favorite battlefield site, personally?
Oh, it's a tough one. Antietam was always one of my favorites growing up because it's such a pristine battlefield. You really feel like you're transported back into 1862 when you visit that battlefield. But we have done so much preservation work in Spotsylvania County that I find Chancellorsville, just because of my own personal involvement there, has become my favorite. Plus, I'm a big Robert E. Lee fan.
Well, we can let that go. I'm Yankee descent from Michigan, but not a descendant of anyone from that era, so I don't take it too personally. Well, that's having a personal involvement certainly would give a sense of ownership, which, to put one more plug in, any of our listeners can get by donating to the Civil War Preservation Trust at civilwar.org. You can metaphorically buy yourself a piece of the Civil War by contributing to this effort that keeps people from building convenience stores on battlefields. Now, we used the word lobbyist earlier, which is not a popular word in American political culture. Can our listeners be assured that if they donate to your organization, they will not see Jim Campy in a new three-piece suit next week?
Yeah, our especially contributions to our fundraising appeals, and there's quite a few of them up on our website, including the Bentonville one. That money goes direct to buying dirt. It does not go to overhead. It does not go to pay anybody's salary. So you can feel very comfortable about that. The other thing I would mention, too, we have a reputation for matching people's money. On average, we turn every dollar that's donated into us into $4. And in the case of our Bentonville appeal, the match is something like $7.72 to 1. So that's quite a deal if you're interested in contributing to land preservation.
Well, that moves me to take some of my meager taxpayer-funded salary here in North Carolina and see if I can't turn some of it around to the Bentonville battlefield, because that is certainly a worthy thing to keep going. One thing, and we're running out of time, but I don't want to fail to ask this. One of the new things in preservation is the viewshed concept. I guess I don't know how new it is. It seems relatively new, perhaps. The idea that it's not just protecting the land, but protecting what you can see from the land. Mm-hmm. And anyone who's been to Gettysburg in the last couple of years knows the Park Service has done wonderful things there. 10 years ago, burying all the utility lines so that you no longer imagine Pickett's troops charging around telephone poles, and more recently cutting down trees that had grown up since the battle and making it look more as it did, and most important of all, destroying the tower, the observation tower built in the early 70s that dominated the view from any point on the battlefield at Gettysburg. No matter where you were, you could always see the dang tower sticking up there, reminding you that this was not 1863. until finally that was purchased. I think eminent domain was used to obtain and destroy the tower. Is this a concept that is becoming more significant, that it doesn't do too much good to preserve 10 square feet if there's a skyscraper next door?
Yeah, it's in fact, I think, thanks to the work of Superintendent John Latcher at Gettysburg National Military Park, landscape restoration and protection of viewshed has become a far bigger priority than it used to be. And, we mentioned a few minutes ago one of my favorite battlefields, Antietam, and I think the reason you get this feeling that you're transformed back in time, because it does look like it did in 1862. If you look out towards South Mountain, you see what the Union and Confederate forces saw. So I think it's very important. And also, instances like at Gettysburg where they're restoring the tree line at Devil's Den, there again you get to see what the soldiers actually saw during the battle, and it helps people that are visiting the site to understand it better, because most average visitors, when they go to these places, think they're seeing what the soldiers saw. And since interpretation is so difficult to begin with, you don't want to complicate it by giving them a view that's different than the 1860s.
Well, that's one of many successes then in the preservation and reinterpretation story. Jim, we are out of time all too soon, but I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Listeners, I want to remind you to go to www.civilwar.org, home of the Civil War Preservation Trust. Learn more about this important organization and consider sending your dollars their way. It's time for our summer break. We'll have rerun shows for the next few months, but we'll be back in August 2008 with more live shows on Civil War Talk Radio. So listeners, until then, have a good summer, and thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.
You're listening to World Talk Radio, Studio A.